So welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to our month session of the big ideas of Jewish prayer. And really this series that we've been having since the beginning of the year is talking about the big questions, the big issues in prayer, and exploring them to the goal of making our prayer life more powerful, more vital. And we have such a complex prayer tradition that there's a lot happening under the surface we take for granted and we don't always talk about or think about sometimes. So some of our sessions have been more study, some have been more practical. This morning, we're going to be talking about balancing individuality and commonality, the idea of personal prayer and communal prayer. And obviously our tradition puts a big emphasis on communal prayer. I'd like to ask, does anybody ever ever pray alone, and why? And if you're willing to share with the group, if you pray alone and why you pray alone or when you pray alone. Marshall, go ahead.
Yeah, I pray every day, and I would say 5 or 6 out of those 7 days is alone. I just I prefer it. First of all, I don't have to get to a minyan, although I live in Jerusalem, so it's not hard to get to a minyan. Hard to get to a minyan I might like, and I just find it it's easier and it's more I don't know what the word is, comforting, I guess, when I do it alone. I had a tradition when I lived in Chicago to go to minyan. I went to minyan multiple times a day when I was saying Kaddish for my mother, and when that year was over, I kept tradition up and I decided to go. I picked on Wednesday mornings. That every Wednesday morning I went to minyan. But the other days, and including now, I usually pray alone except for Shabbat.
So the comforting part is being in your own space at your own pace.
And starting when I can start, not looking at the clock, kind of thing. Take longer, take shorter. There is a comfort I do get when I do go to minyan. If other than Shabbat, I try. First of all, there are some minyanim here that can use me, so that feels very good when you go and you help make the 10. There are other minyanim that it doesn't matter if I'm there or not. There's scores of people there, so that doesn't matter. So I try to balance both.
Extra mitzvah points for making the minyan.
Yes, yeah.
And thank you so much. Anyone else praying alone? Hinda, go ahead.
When I don't get to shul on a Shabbat, I will pray on my own, and it's just there's a quality to it that I wish I could bring with me to shul. But the time pressure is such that people seem to need to get done at a certain time. I feel I'm rushing. So when I'm by myself, it doesn't bother me if I'm later. It takes me longer to get through the Amidah say. And when I pray alone, especially on Yom Kippur, I have a custom of coming home for a Milah. I feel I need to really focus. And somehow I'm distracted in shul. So when I get home, I can pray and actually can hear myself praying. It's like I would say the words very softly because they're in my head. And that way I feel like I've really reached the levels of Kavanah that I couldn't reach in shul. I don't know why exactly.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Right? There's comes alive when you're doing your own way and all the conditions are of your choice, and you're in your own space, your own avira, your own energia, your own atmosphere. Anyone else? So I'd like to move on then and just maybe summarize and say, well, what are the benefits of praying in a group? Let's go the other direction. What are the benefits of praying in a group, of communal prayer? Carol, go ahead. Suzanne.
I was going to say, the group keeps me more focused. That's what, and one of the things I always liked about the morning minion was being part of a group and, seeing friendly faces every morning, which I can still do on Zoom, but not quite the same. But anyway, but I was going to say, to go back to the other question too about praying alone, and we probably all had this experience. I've certainly been, I don't do it regularly and I don't have like a pattern, but there's certainly times when things happen and I find myself praying for an answer or some kind of guidance or just get me through this. And so then I certainly, those, but maybe those are more like pleading sessions. Prayer.
That's prayer. That's definitely prayer. It's talking.
I'm calling on somebody.
Yeah, exactly. You're calling on God, on universe. Definitely, that's definitely prayer. So, in some ways, is that more prayer than the other? That's a good question. But he's talked about, keeps you, helps you focus. I mean, there's something about being held to a discipline, right? That you come to Minyan or you come to shul regularly, you're going to be there for 2 hours, 1 hour, and you might not. For a lot of people, it's harder to do that by yourself. Have that discipline and build it, and so you come and you do it, and you get it done. Suzanne.
Yeah, for me, it's basically being of service to the community, because if you don't show up, you might be the 10th, and if you don't show up, somebody can't say Kaddish. Or certain, if it's a holiday, or if it's like Chol Moed and you're having to do extra things that you need a minyan for, it won't happen if you don't show up. And I remember telling people, who were afraid to come to minyan, I said, all you have to do is be breathing and be present. You don't have to do anything else. They were so intimidated by language, by Hebrew, and I'm saying, I said, this is the coolest mitzvah. All you have to do is show up and breathe. It's like, this is amazing. And for me, it's the balance. To my personal pattern is to do more contemplative prayer, or to focus on key themes of the Shacharit service. And I used to just say certain things when I used to commute. I would say it on the L and I would say it on the bus personally. So, but being there to serve the community, to me, it's so much more, for me, it really balances out. The two are really, to me, are two sides of a very important coin.
Beautiful, right. There's such a spiritual sense of the community of it. I mean, we'll talk about this later, but our religion is built around the minyan, right? Our prayer is built around it. I mean, it's a very powerful idea. But the community, prayer, in community, you see people, you uphold the community, you get together, you see, it forces you to see other Jewish people, and this whole custom of, people saying Kaddish. And then we live in a globalized world. So people travel around the world and encounter Jews of all kinds if they say Kaddish, and you end up in all kinds of unusual minions, right? When you're doing this, and you become part of communities, and it's a very powerful thing. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, but I think there is a beautiful experience of praying together when you're in song and you're uplifted and everybody's singing. That's beautiful, right? That's a beautiful experience. Norma, go ahead.
I think because of the pandemic and the years that Howard and I could not go to services because we had always gone, the difference became when we went back in person was the connection was there. I mean, fine, on Zoom, it's better than not having it, but actually being there and seeing Suzanne every week, at the door, it's like, oh, there's that wonderful person. And I have to say one thing about the minions, Suzanne, I don't go that often, but when I go, I know if I sit next to Morris, I know exactly where I am because he always helps me. Thank you, Morris.
Thank you. Well, and so people's presences are comforting and they help your prayer, and it's, it's being with friends, but it's not only social, it's also something else. We're all together more than the sum of our parts, right? Where there's something special that happens. And an image that came into my mind too is, high holidays, looking out at the sea of people, and there's so many people, and you're all singing, Ashamnu, and you're that's powerful. It's powerful to all be together doing that. That's powerful. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'd like to just ask you to elaborate. When we were in meditation this morning,
Yes.
we had 10 people, which we don't always have. But then you said it's kind of like a reflection of the Sifrot, the 10 Sifrot.
Yeah.
Is that why we have 10 as a minyan?
So, I'll talk about that a little. I'll talk about later, but that's what later Kabbalistic tradition said, which was that when you have a minyan of 10 people, everybody brings their spiritual quality to it. And it's like the 10 Sefirot. The 10 Sefirot together, the 10 Sefirot are the 10 different qualities of divine shefa, of energy or flow. So when you have 10 people, it's like you're bringing in every single divine quality together, and there's a fullness that comes from it. You're building something, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I think that's all together. We're more than the sum of our parts. We're building something spiritual together, and that was the idea. So that's what the later Kabbalah said. Minyan predates Kabbalah, but maybe Kabbalah says they were based on prophetic ideas. So maybe the idea of the minyan did come from that. I mean, it's a good, who knows? It could be multiple ideas, but there's a sense that 10 is a complete number, and that you're having, it's true though. When you have 10 people, you feel, okay, this is a good group of people. I'm not sure if I think that way because I'm conditioned as a Jew. But it seems like, okay, now we have a complete group of people incorporating many different things, and we're ready to go ahead. And we'll read some text about that, Morris. Not about that precisely, but that whole idea. One other thought that comes to me is, when you have a leader, what's the purpose of the Shaliach Tzibor, the leader of the congregation? Right, this on high holidays when the cantor is singing Hineni, right? It's when you're in the prayer in synagogue with people, when the prayer leader is feeling inspired, that helps your prayer, right? That that elevates your own prayer and elevates everything that's happening. So that's also something you don't get when you're alone. If your prayer is flat that day, your prayer is flat that day. Not much you can do about it. But if you're in synagogue, you can be uplifted by other people. So, Alan, were you going to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. Your screen just came up, so sometimes someone just muted themselves. But on the other hand, we already talked about it, but I want to quickly go over what are the benefits of praying by yourself. So we talked about, being in your own space at your own pace. Hinda talked about finding kavanah, intention in some ways can be easier by yourself. Well, anybody have any other things they want to add to that list? Why it's easier to pray by yourself? So one that was pointed out to me that I saw in my talking with my father about this, and he has a book about meditation which talks about this. But when you're in a space with other people, you have the benefits of social interaction, but you also have the drawbacks. When you're by yourself, there's nobody's going to hurt your feelings or make callous remarks. There's nobody, there's nobody who you might make you feel unwelcome. There's no personality issues. The one always will get spending many years or even decades in a congregation. And there's no scheduling. We talked about this a few years ago. We tried to change a time of Friday night services from 6:30 as it was to 6 in the winters and 7 in the summer. And everybody's schedules were like, no, I can't because I do dinner before, I do dinner after, I do this, I do that. And so scheduling is so complicated when you're dealing with a lot of people, and that's just it's never perfect, and when you're in a group, it's nice because you see your friends, but you're, high holidays thinking, well, what is Cohen wearing? Or is Cohen looking what I'm wearing? Or is Cohen going to judge me if I start shuckling and doing my thing or singing too loudly? Or what does so-and-so think of my singing? So the social aspect is positive, but it can also take us away from what we're doing, which is pray. Or we haven't seen a friend in a long time, so we start talking, and the whole service has gone by. And it might have been a good use in some ways of that because we got to catch up with Cohen, but it might also be it's also wasn't what we were there for.
The other thing is what you taught us in the last class about how if you don't know the exact prayer that's in the book that you're reading, so put in your own, well, at home, there's no book. You don't have to have the book. You can make up your own words. I think that's what I mean, your own words.
Beautiful. You can make up your own words, and you can say, for 2-3 minutes, you can say the Shema, and then make up your own words for 10 minutes. And those 13 minutes might give you more of a prayer oomph than the 2 hours in synagogue, because it's tailor-made to where you are. And so from a spiritual point of view, there's benefits too in praying alone. So unless anybody has anything else they wanted to.
I think sometimes that we are in a real rush to get through the service. So the prayers have less meaning to us, and that sometimes we can take a look at an individual prayer and really look into the meaning of the prayer and what it's all about, and how it reflects on our own life, and really delve into the liturgy of that prayer and the meaning, and come away with something far deeper.
Thank you. Even if you try and do that in the public setting, you might then hear the rabbi say, page 164, please rise, or please sit, or the cantor is starting to sing, Ose Shalom, and then you've got to end your Amida, and it's and we, as I often will say, our prayers have gone so long, we have so many pages to go through, so we just have a lot to get through. So it's hard to really spend our time to really go deeply into prayer. So it's not always ideal. We just have to, we have, even the fact we use this language, we have to get through it. We have to get through our 50 pages, isn't a good way to think about, a prayer service. If you think about it, it'd be better to say, oh, we're going to really enjoy getting through these 10 pages. Instead of like, okay, I've got to get through these, how many times on high holidays, people, including myself, if you look, like how many pages left do I have until the end of this, until the end of Musaf, Shoshana, right? It's like, okay, I have 20, 30 pages left. Okay, we're almost there. I mean, there's a beauty to the stamina, right? It's like running a marathon, right? How many more miles do I have? But sometimes even that state of mind might take us away from it. So I wanted to now maybe shift a little bit and talk about, how did we get to this? Because we obviously have this emphasis on communal prayer. We really do. And it's not obvious, right? If you talk about prayer to other traditions, the first thought might be a personal prayer, in Hinduism, maybe Christianity. I mean, Muslims pray in group, but they pray a lot by themselves. I mean, for Orthodox Jews, they end up praying, or people who have a daily prayer practice, they end up praying alone a fair amount. But the ideal is in the minyan, right? People who are this. I remember when I was at Pardes in Jerusalem, and there was a teacher, Rav Meir, and he's a serious guy. And he would come every morning from minyan and always go to minyan from every day, mincha mariv. He was always in a minyan. And one morning there wasn't a minyan for shacharit. So what did he do? He was scheduled to teach a class. He did not teach that class. He went elsewhere to go get a minyan because he wasn't ready to give up those mitzvah points, So that was his practice. He went somewhere else. He stopped because that's how important the minyan was to him. So even the idea of what we've been talking about, you need 10 people to pray, is so powerful, right? Almost all Jews know this. It's a really strong idea within our tradition. So where does it come from? I mean, even the fact that the Kaddish prayer, a prayer you say when mourning, which is, you'd think they'd make it easier for you to mourn, right? Or to pray for somebody who's passed on. They make it very hard. You have to have 10 people. It's amazing when you think about it. We don't think about it, but it's amazing they made that choice to make that prayer a challenge to fulfill. So that's how powerful. So where does it come from? What one idea is, maybe it comes all the way back to the temple and the tabernacle, which were a centralized place of worship, right? Thousands and thousands of people would all come together during holidays and other times, and they would pray together in the tabernacle. They would pray together in the temple. And when you read through the Tanakh, the Bible, there are all these stories from prophets and others who are railing against what were considered to be illegitimate sacrifice centers, the bamot, high places where people would sacrifice. But the authorities weren't happy. They said, no, you've got to come to the temple in Jerusalem. That's where you pray to God, right? It was a centralized place. And people would come. It was even more, right? Thousands of people would come on the holidays, on Pesach, on Sukkot, and they would throng together. And they'd have a lot of those benefits of what we were talking about, being together, praying together. Of course, I'm sure they also, instead of listening to the high priest on Yom Kippur, you're catching up with Cohen, who you haven't seen in a year, that's been the way Jews have done it for a very, very, very long time. That's, and it must have been very powerful, on the other hand, to be in that courtyard on Yom Kippur when the high priest came out and said God's name. And we were all praying for atonement together. And it's just how we're set up. We received the Torah together. We traveled through the desert together. We built the tabernacle together. We prayed in the tabernacle together. And historically, if you think about it, when the first temple was destroyed, that's when they say the first synagogues, proto-synagogues, were created in Babylon because they wanted places to congregate. But then when the second temple was built, that again became the center of everything. So you can imagine that when the second temple was destroyed, you're not going to go from a centralized place where everybody prays together and go from that into just praying by yourself. That's just too much of a big change, right? How do you go from the whole people praying together basically to praying by yourself? That's too much of a jump. And so the rabbis who took over the leadership of Judaism after the destruction of the temple, they also had a very strong aspiration of and goal and challenge of trying to preserve Judaism amidst exile, right? Amidst being a minority, and so community became the center of everything, right? Community.
Wasn't there already a diaspora in the time of the second temple?
That's true. There was a diaspora, and they were already organized as synagogues. So it's true. It's already those ideas. And when people were in the diaspora, they needed to congregate together, and they needed to also preserve their sense of identity. And community is a way you preserve your identity when you're a minority, right? There's those beautiful descriptions of these huge synagogues in Alexandria and Second Temple, this whole period, because people got together and they needed to get together. But I think it became even more important after the destruction of the temple, after the exile, and Judaism could have disappeared. So one of the ways you stop it from disappearing is you force community, you force communal prayer, you force it to happen. And the Talmud is just full of many passages with very strong language about how important communal prayer is. And if you don't pray, your prayers are not going to be heard. And it's really the very, very, they really try to force it. So I want to look at one very short one, and then one that's a little bit longer. The most important proof text for prayer, for a communal prayer. So make this a little bit bigger. Alan, how about number one?
Hey, for vote. Hillel says, do not separate yourself from the community.
So this is a general one, but obviously it's important. But why not separate yourself from the community? Why is this so important?
If you- if
Because
you-
otherwise the community dies.
Exactly. Otherwise, the community dies.
And you're isolated. I think of some people who I used to see who don't come out at all anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good. It's good. It's good. It's good for your mental state. And Jews
Right.
have a lot of negative input into their mental state through all the suffering we've been through, and it keeps the community going. Yeah. And it keeps Judaism from dissipating and keeps people reconnecting to the ideas, to everything.
And since with anti-Semitism being so prevalent,
Yeah.
we need to be together, to belong together.
Beautiful. And one of the ways to create that community is, so they did many things, right? One was, they said every Jewish community, they made even more stringent laws of kashrut. So you have to have a kosher butcher, and you have to have a mikvah, and they put all these things you have to have so that Jewish communities need to be in big places and people need to be all together. And, they did everything they could to create that community. But one of them was prayer, was communal prayer. This is one of their tools for keeping people from separating from the community. Because when you have a person who's going to die in your family, and we all have people who die because this is life, then you're going to go to the minyan, and you have no way around that if you want to say Kaddish, and that many people want to say Kaddish as best they can. So let's read the second one. Why don't you continue, please? This is the most important text in the Talmud for why we pray at minyan.
Do you want me to continue?
Yeah.
It may be from the Babylonian Talmud, tractate Berachot. It may be inferred that in a place of song, a synagogue where God's praises are sung, there prayer should be. In explaining Abba Binyamin's statement, Ravin Bar Rav Ada said that Rabbi Yitzchak said, "From where is it derived that the Holy One, blessed be he, is located in a synagogue? As it is stated, God stands in the congregation of God. In the midst of the judges, he judges. The congregation of God is the place where people congregate to sing God's praises, and God is located among his congregation. And from where is it derived that 10 people who pray, the divine presence is with them? As it is stated, God stands in the congregation of God. And the minimum number of people that constitutes a congregation is a quorum of 10.
Beautiful. Thank you. So it's a pretty strong idea. God is in the synagogue, right? They're stating God is in our synagogues. And it's saying God stands with us when we're a quorum of 10. It's a pretty strong statement. It's saying that God is not with us when we're not all together. I mean, that's a pretty strong statement.
So there is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Avram is looking for first and then 20 and then 10 righteous people who may be in Sodom to save the city. And I always think of that story as part of the reason that we have a quorum of 10, to say that there are 10 righteous people who are gathering together to praise God.
Yeah.
Rabbi, I had a question though. It mentions synagogue at the beginning, but further on, it really focuses on congregation. So I guess I just want to understand community versus a physical building.
Yeah.
That if 10 Jews come together wherever, there is the congregation.
Yeah. No, definitely. The most important thing is the text, this quote, God stands in the congregation of God. That is the whole Torah, the whole Tanakh basis of the minyan, and it's the I on one of our new Torah mantles, I had this quote put in there because this is the quote for the basis for a minyan and I think it's in our minyan, the little Torah, in that little mantle. I had this one put because it's the Torah, it's a little Torah we use in minyan. So this is a good quote, but it's saying the God stands when there's a lot of people, right? God wants to be among his congregation, and the minimum number of people that constitute a congregation is a quorum of 10. So they're saying, well, what is a congregation? When it says in Psalms, God stands in the congregation. Well, what is a congregation? How many people is a congregation? You're going to call 5 people a congregation? No, that can't be a congregation. You got to have 10 people for it to be a congregation. So really a shul, you only need 10 people to have a shul, right? You only need, once you have 10 people and 100 opinions, then you've got a shul. But it's such a beautiful idea, but it's a very radical idea, right? It's a very radical idea that you need a congregation of people for God to be present, and we really it reflects in the. So why is it that we have some prayers like the Kaddish and others you can only say in the minyan? Because those prayers that have to do with holiness can only be recited by 10. So that means that only when we're 10 do we achieve holiness, which is a very bold idea, right? A very bold idea. I wonder if it took time for that idea to take on among, Jews when they really started to focus on it and build it. And, they did this in a very conscious way. It's throughout the Talmud. There are many passages like this where they say how important it is to have a 10 and for our prayers to be heard. There's one that says, well, God is not very happy if he goes and he doesn't find those 10. Anybody have any other thoughts or questions about this text? It's also about singing God's praises, right? God likes him when we're all together singing his praises, right? When he hears 10 people or more singing God's praises, that's beautiful. And it reminds us of the singing in the temple, right? In the temple, they had thousands of people singing and Levites, and it was this beautiful song that went up to God together, and that created something beautiful in the world. It was like because prayer is about reaching God, but it's also about creating something in the universe, right? Bringing out peace to the universe. When you have 10 people singing, you have 10 people creating this beautiful, peaceful song, which is sending that out into the world, right? That's something that's really, really special. And God likes that, right? To borrow from our parsha this week, it makes a pleasant fragrance to God when we're doing it. So we're going to stop sharing for a minute, but we'll go back just in 1 minute. So I think that this approach that you find in the Talmud, which is in this text and many other texts, just continues through 2,000 years of exile, and it becomes just part of Jewish prayer. That what I was talking about, Rav Meir from Pardes, you don't want to, the minyan is so important. And when, even in our minyan, right, when we don't have the minyan, people are deflated, you're like, oh, we didn't make minyan, it's deeply within us that minyan is so very important. So I think there's these historical reasons, but there's also the deeper reasons we've been talking about too, the spiritual reasons, and what we were talking about with Morris's question. So I want to bring up a Hasidic story. This one is in my father's meditation book, and I mentioned it a few times probably over the years. One of my favorite stories is the Baal Shem Tov, which I think really illustrates what's so powerful about what we're trying to achieve with communal prayer. Morris, do you mind, since you brought up to some degree this idea, do you mind reading this?
No, not at all. Living the Life of Jewish Meditation, Rabbi Yoel Glick, page 208, quoting Yuri Shraga Feivel of Krishnapoli, or HaChochmah. The Baal Shem was known for his deep states of prayer that could last for hours. On one occasion, the Baal Shem went on for so long with his prayers that the Hasidim got up and left. Later in the day, they returned to the house of prayer. When all the Hasidim were present, the Baal Shem admonished them for leaving while he was still praying. Then he recounted the following parable. There once was a rare and magnificent bird that perched on the top of an incredibly high tree in a certain kingdom. The tree was so high that nobody could climb to the top. When word of this extraordinary creature was brought to the king, he gathered hundreds of his subjects at the foot of the tree and then commanded them to stand on top of one another to form a human ladder. In this manner, they reached the top of the tree, captured the bird, and brought it to the royal court. When the Baal Shem finished telling the parable, he turned to his Hasidim and declared, when we join together in prayer, we become a single chain of spiritual longing that reaches up into the highest heaven. When you abandoned me during my prayers, however, the cosmic ladder that we were building collapsed, and the precious gift that we might have brought to the King of Kings was lost.
So there is this idea, right, that when we're praying together in a minyan or in a group, we're building something together, right? We're building something together. It's like we're building this long, all of our focuses are coming together. I mean, doesn't always happen, but when it does, this is what we're doing. We're building something together. One person is on top of the other, so to speak, obviously, on top of the other, and it's allowing us to go higher and higher and higher and achieve something that we would not be able to achieve otherwise, to bring a beautiful gift of to the universe, to God. So one thought that comes to mind is, even in high holidays, right? First day of Rosh Hashanah, we're singing, Berosh Hashanah Yikatevun. We're all together, and there's a sense of everybody, and people really feel that prayer, right? And then after that prayer, people start to leave, and you can feel that the intensity starts to drop. Because there's something when we're all together, we are standing on top of each other, creating something really beautiful and special together. We're standing on top of each other's shoulders. And it connects to the idea of what Morris was saying before, the idea in the Zohar, that each one of us is like one of the 10 Sefirot, the building blocks of the universe, meaning that each one of us is one part of that ladder, right? Maybe it's a ladder, maybe it's a support, a foundation. And so when somebody leaves, it's like, okay, well, we've lost that person, we've lost their quality, what they bring, their unique quality to the ladder, which allows us to bring this special bird. Obviously, we don't take birds and bring them to sovereigns anymore. It's an old metaphor, but it's the metaphor is clear, is pretty clear about what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring something to the world, to God, and we're all together. It happens more easily. Anybody have any thoughts about this one?
Rabbi, this highlights for me a real tension between spirituality and practicality, especially for the Shaliach Tzibor. It's, yes, you don't want to be going so long that people, because of their own personal needs or schedules, have to abandon the minyan. So it's, I think it's a beautiful thought, but also people are people and they have real lives. And it's just, it's like everybody who leads prayer needs to be sensitive to the needs of the minyan and honor them for being there, and also honor their own individual needs. It's real tension.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, the Baal Shem Tov, and we're not all the Baal Shem Tov in this Chassidim, right?
Right.
If you have a job, I remember when I was in rabbinical school and I used to lead the morning minyan, and other people, we would all pray together, but if anybody went too long, I would sometimes go a little bit long. One of the teachers, the Rabbi, would come up and be like, hey, I need to get to my, they would say afterwards, I needed to get to this thing, and you went over a little bit, or you went over, and it's, because morning minyan, people allot a certain amount of time to it, and it's on the other hand, there's also a sense of what's most important. There are some days where some people have jobs where you've got to be there at 9. That's just the way it is, or you have to start at 9. And sometimes people are okay. Sometimes you can also get lost the other way, which is, okay, I'm here for 45 minutes, and even if the prayer is good, I don't care. I want to go on to my next thing. So there's both sides of that, but it is true when you're praying, and this is going to be our next text. Actually, we'll get to, when you're praying alone, you can do whatever you want, right? You can take as long as you want, but when you're praying with other people, you've got to think about what everybody has to do. But maybe a way to bring this consciousness, and this is a consciousness in prayer, is that there are certain moments when we're in synagogue praying together where we can bring this consciousness and think about it. Hey, wow, when I'm praying with everybody else, we're not just singing. I mean, singing is very nice, but we're trying to build something together, some kind of structure together, a human ladder. So let's pause this for a second, and I'm going to now take us to our last text, which brings, I don't think we'll do our very last, but we'll do this one, what we were talking about. And Suzanne, do you mind reading this one?
Rabbi Akiva?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When Rabbi Akiva prayed in public, he would pray quickly in order not to be a burden on everyone else. However, when he prayed privately, he bowed down and prostrated himself and infused his prayers with so much intention that he would start at one side of the room and conclude on the other.
Well, this is what you were saying, but it's also saying, okay, well, which one was more important to Rabbi Akiva, right? I mean, maybe they both were, but I have this wonderful image when I read this. We've read some before. Imagine him start at one side of the room, and he's so oblivious to where he's in. He suddenly opens his eyes, and he's inside the closet, or he's moved so far with all of his. And then back in those days, we did full prostrations, right? It wasn't just a little bend, it was a full prostration.
But Rabbi, I guess not answering your question, but commenting on your question about which is more important to him. I think he's saying when you're part of that congregation, that community, you have to be part of it and respect everybody's needs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of, I don't know if it's taking the going for the lowest bar or the highest bar. I'm not sure what it would be in this case. But when you're by yourself, you could do what you want, and you could pray as with as much or as little intention, as long or as little as you want, as quickly or as slowly, because you are only you've only got yourself to answer to.
Very nice, very true. Anyone else? How does it present the personal prayer part?
It's wonderful if you can do it. If you can do it on your own, it's wonderful, but it's not either or. It's like you can go as far as you want individually, but when you're part of the community, it's not about you anymore. It's about the community.
It's part of the community, definitely. Well, a thought I would maybe add to it too is that the prayer that he does privately is a very intense prayer, and so he can't do that in the congregation because everyone else is there. But how important it is to have both, maybe, because if you don't have the other one, when do you have those moments to really infuse your prayer with your whole heart? And when do you have those moments to do that? And because we have so many worries in the public setting, we don't. It's what Hinda was saying earlier. It's hard to bring your kavanah. It's the time. What Mike was saying, the getting into it. all those ways that you would want to pray, you can't always do that, or maybe you can never do. I mean, it's hard. And so, if because of our focus on communal prayer, which is so important, but eventually you could lose touch with actually what prayer is about. I mean, prayer in its most basic form is an individual, right, reaching out into the infinite, right? That's what to make a bridge to talk to God, right? That's what prayer is. It's ultimately it's a very personal thing, and I think communal prayer is so important for us that we sometimes lose touch of what the personal prayer is. And there are all these. There obviously you can't. You got if you want. It's better if you can finish by noon. We have all these things that we're in the communal prayer part, where in the end, prayer can just become singing and sitting together and fulfilling all those wonderful things. But then you lose what prayer is actually about. And in many ways, the very structure of prayer was set up to help people because individual prayer is hard, right? Individual prayer is hard. So, okay, we'll give you words. Individual prayer is hard. So we'll create a whole kind of journey of different psalms and prayers to create a journey for you, because when you're by yourself praying, you don't always find the words you need. So it's all of it was to help us set up prayer, which is really an individual process between us and the Creator. And when you look in the Tanakh, in the Bible, all the cases of prayer are all personal, right? We talked about this a few times ago, right? How are the Shacharit, according to Talmud, Shacharit Mincha Mariv created, by Abraham by himself, and by Isaac by himself, meditating when Rebecca's coming, and Jacob when he's running around because he's worried his brother is going to kill him, and so he's going to sleep and he prays to God, and that's Mariv. And so many of our prayers are actually coming from those individual moments. And even right when Moses' sister is struck with leprosy, he didn't say, hey, let's gather a minyan and pray to God. He turns to God and he says, El Narafan Allah. He says, please God, heal her, and she's healed. So all the stories in the Bible of prayer are really individual. Hannah, who's the very basis of what prayer is, she goes, right? We read this on Rosh Hashanah when we're all together, hundreds of people, but she goes up, and her husband and all the family are separated, and she goes by herself into the tabernacle and starts to pour out her heart because she doesn't have a child, and she's praying to God, and she's doing it by herself, and she's moving her lips, but you can't hear the sound. It's a very personal prayer.
Rabbi, this is Barb. I was going to say, I almost always do personal prayers at the end of the Amida, and it may mean that I cut the Amida short a little. I don't necessarily read it also that I have time for my personal prayers, but that's where I do it, so that, every time I do come to services, I do have a moment for that.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, we've created the Amida is as close as we get to it, and we do have that time afterwards. We're supposed to add those prayers, and that's right. There is a time where we have personal prayer. But what would you do, Barb, if let's say you're in the middle of one of those personal prayer and you start to hear, oh, say shalom, 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 and you cut short your prayer and sit down, and you continue it?
No, I usually wait till I'm done, but yes. Good. And then I don't know why, but it's just like a habit for me that when I'm done with my personal prayer, I kiss the prayer book. It's just kind of putting a period at the end. That's when I'm done.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
A few years ago, Vanity Fair magazine that I happened to come across did an article. It was written by a female neurologist, and she was told by several of her patients that they did prayer groups. Even if they all didn't live in the same place, they did prayer groups for a friend together. And then she herself had a brain tumor and had asked her friends to do a prayer group for her. And she said it was very powerful because it stretched all the way around the country, people, relatives, and friends everywhere praying for her.
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, we even on Zoom, right? Zoom, where we're all around different places, and we're praying together. Or I find it always powerful when we hear, when there's something going on in the world, and that a lot of people are praying together for the same thing, or saying psalms, or when there was that horrible hostage taking at the synagogue, was last month. So I knew at that point that there were groups around the world that were saying psalms, right, reciting psalms to Hillel to help that situation, and that's another example of the power of communal prayer. Perhaps going back to the Rabbi Akiva text, you having both of them is what creates, in my mind at least, infuses the other with power, right? When you're praying by yourself, but you're going to come once a week or twice a week to be in a minyan, then maybe the power of everything you've done over the week in your personal prayer flows into the minyan. And when you're used to going into the minyan and you hear different melodies and you see other people pray, it brings you new inspiration for your own personal prayers too. And so it's both are needed. Both are really part of our tradition. And in some ways, sometimes maybe different periods in our history can get lost for the other, or for a lot of people, we know what it's like in synagogue, but what does it feel like to pray by myself at home? That feels very different, and I don't even know what that feels like, or what does that look like? If that's the case, I guess maybe my advice would be, try and pick one day where you say the Amida just by yourself. Pick one day. Okay, on Wednesdays, in the morning or at night, I'm going to open up a siddur, a weekday siddur, and just pray the Amida, or and I'll just commit to that once a week and see what that does for me, and maybe see if that affects when I'm in synagogue, or say the Shema, say the Shema every night before I go to sleep. And say, if you want to add a little bit, in the Siddur, there's prayers you say before the Shema, where you say, forgive everybody who's hurt me, and I forgive everyone who's I forgive everyone who's hurt me, and I ask forgiveness from God for everything I've done to hurt other people, and I pray to the angels. And so there's, or you wake up in the morning. So there's different ways to add a little bit of private personal prayer into our lives. But I think that's when you get the best effect, is when you have both of those, because then if you have that intention in your personal prayer when you come into the synagogue, whether you feel it or not, I think you bring that into the community. You're enriching the community's prayer with that.
Rabbi, can I ask a quick question? So is it, I think it's proper, but I don't know whether we often do it, to say mourner's Kaddish because of, for example, the victims in Ukraine, or, a friend, so they're not family, but is that something that's appropriate, and would you do it?
It's a good question. According to strict halacha, first of all, you shouldn't say mourner's Kaddish at all unless both your parents are passed away. That was the unless, that was the in some ways the original halacha. In the conservative movement, the prayer leader started to say, if you go to an Orthodox synagogue, only the people saying Kaddish say Kaddish. The prayer leader does not say Kaddish unless they themselves are in mourning. But in the conservative synagogue, maybe because there's some people for whom saying Kaddish is more difficult, the prayer leader says it to help guide people in saying it. And also, we start to develop the practice of saying, even if you're a prayer leader, you're saying it for somebody who died in the Holocaust. Any day there's someone who deserves a Kaddish who died in the Holocaust, or who can have a Kaddish. And so in the conservative movement, we kind of lost some of the taboo. There's a taboo in the Orthodox world of not saying Kaddish unless you really should. It's almost like inviting something bad to happen to you. But in the conservative world, we started saying Kaddish for situations like that. people often do, at a Shiva minyan, people or a funeral, people say Kaddish, even if they weren't an immediate relative of the person. But they don't have the obligation. The obligation, it's not a mitzvah, it's a prayer. But if you're saying Kaddish for your deceased person, then you're fulfilling a mitzvah. So it's different. It has more weight. But I think it still has power. A prayer has power. What is that prayer doing? It's claiming the power of life, right? And the power of and the sovereignty of God throughout all universes, even though we can't understand how that sovereignty is being expressed at this moment. We're saying God is in all worlds and everything. Even in this moment, I believe there's something greater to life than just this world. I believe the soul is going somewhere else. So this is maybe where it comes up in a really distinct way. Often people ask me, well, can I say Kaddish by myself? I just can't get to minyan, and when can I say it? So I'll say, you're not going to be fulfilling the traditional idea of saying it with the minyan, but if you want to say a version, there's also versions of the Kaddish which are a little bit different, even in our Siddur, which you can say even when you're alone. If you want to say it and it brings you something, I think that it's powerful, but it's not as powerful as when we're all together saying Kaddish. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining. And look forward to learning and praying together soon. And I guess my final thought is just the power of personal prayer is also very important. I think we lose touch of it maybe in Judaism. And, I would encourage everybody to experiment a little bit. Try adding a little bit here. Try a Namida once a week. Try something and see how it feeds your soul.